In this video, I'll tell you about something that I just learned about hobby motivation in my own hobby and how it just might help your motivation too. Tabletop wargaming is a weird hobby, admittedly. I love it, but it seems very odd to a lot of people, and not just people outside of the hobby. I feel like there's a lot of people who are like in the hobby that are a bit flummoxed by it as well. It's a very kind of two-part hobby, and those two parts are very distinct from each other. There's the craft, and then there's the play part. In most gaming hobbies, there's generally just the play part. You download a video game and then you start playing said video game. You buy a board game, you read the rules, and you start playing said board game. In wargaming, you don't just start playing. In wargaming, there's the craft of building and painting your models to have, finished play pieces so that you can then play. There have been war games that have tried to take that sort of building and painting part out of the equation so that you can just buy the stuff and start playing. And a few have been successful, kind of majorly successful for a while, but even the most successful pre-painted games with the biggest intellectual properties in the world still don't dominate the market and kind of didn't last. So the craft of building and painting your little soldiers and such is still pretty much the standard. And this crafting is where the problem lies for a lot of people. People new to the hobby and longtime players alike. The crafting part, the building and the painting, can be seen as kind of a hurdle that a player has to sort of leap over to get to the gaming part. Now, for me, personally, I love building and painting. I love that part. I love the gaming too, but I don't need to play all the time or, play competitively like in tournaments or big events to enjoy the overall hobby. I like playing fun, kind of low-key narrative games with friends and using painted models and terrain to do it. But the motivation to actually sit down and build and paint miniatures is a problem for many folks in the hobby, both new and old. I hear about it all the time. People ask me in comments, people ask me in live chats here on YouTube and on Twitch and in other forms of social media as well. I've made bunches of videos over the years about motivation in your hobby, how to find motivation, how to stay motivated. And recently, I think I've discovered something else about hobby motivation that I've missed for years. Recently, I've started painting BattleTech mechs from Catalyst Game Labs so I can play Alpha Strike, the streamlined version of BattleTech. BattleTech has been around for 40 years or so. My first tabletop wargaming was BattleTech back in the 1980s when I was in middle school, 7th or 8th grade. And the base game hasn't changed a lot, at least to my eyes. Alpha Strike is much more simplified, streamlined, all that kind of stuff, which I generally prefer. So I've started painting all the models that came in the Alpha Strike starter box that I bought. I went through those 13 models pretty quickly, as it turns out, and then I bought some more and started on those. And I've really been enjoying myself. Like I said earlier, I like to build and paint miniatures for wargaming, but these BattleTech mechs have really held my attention recently and made me want to paint all of the time. And it's not honestly due to the models or to the poses or anything like that. Frankly, some of these mechs are kind of ugly. They're not necessarily the prettiest designs or whatever, and the models themselves aren't really amazing either, technically, right? The details aren't as sharp as GW models, and the plastic isn't as nice as GW, but it's not bad. On the other hand, they're pre-built, and a box of 4 or 5 mechs is cheaper than most Games Workshop single figures. But I figured out what I really enjoy about painting them. They're what I would consider kind of sci-fi military figures, And my style of painting military figures is that most everything is kind of painted the same color, right? Like in the military, everything is mostly green or tan or gray or white or whatever. Sometimes it's dependent on the local flora, kind of like camouflage. You're on a desert planet, you got desert stuff. You're on a snow planet, you got, white or whatever, But other times it's just the color that the force or nation or whatever has decided on to help differentiate them from, other forces on the battlefield. But either way, the painting goes pretty quick and still looks pretty good. I've used this technique recently on a few different forces that I've painted. I painted an Imperial Guard combat patrol, mostly in gray tones, and I loved how they came out. I also painted two forces for Blackout, Harlow and Manticore, and they were pretty simple paint schemes by some standards, but again, they looked military and turned out great in my mind. I also quickly painted the Spartans from the Halo Recon box from Mantic, and instead of painting them all super colorful metallic like from the video game, I made one set olive drab and one set tan, and I really like them. Liking how you're painting the models is actually a great hobby motivator. Long ago, I learned that I don't enjoy playing big army games, right? I prefer small skirmish games. This is great for me since I also don't enjoy building and painting big army games either. I prefer building and painting a small group of models and then moving on to something different. If I had to build and paint some big army like a 2,000 point Warhammer 40k army, for example, with 50 to 100 different models, I would certainly have some hobby motivation problems. My wife got into fiber hobbies like knitting and crocheting and stuff like that about 10 or more years ago. The big popular thing at the time was amigurumi, which I'm probably mispronouncing. It's a Japanese term, which are these little knit or crocheted animals and dolls and stuff like that. They're very cute, of course, So she tried making those. She hated it, just absolutely couldn't stand the process of doing the little cute, it's just, So then knitting crazy socks was also really big at that time too, really super colorful crazy socks, and she tried that and hated it as well. But the more kind of old school traditional stuff like sweaters and shawls, she loved doing those. The more complicated, the better, and she still knits pretty much every single day to this day. Hobby motivation can frequently be a matter of what you're painting or how you're doing it, not just the act of painting itself, for example. I found I really love painting small forces in simple, kind of military-type schemes, partially because it's just fun, but also because it gets me a force to play on the tabletop quickly and looks how I want it to look. You might be out there hating painting your army, but you'd actually really love to potentially paint display models, for to put on the shelf or to take to competitions and stuff like that, spending months and months and months on one fancy miniature, but you've always been painting armies, so you don't even know. Let's just say maybe you love Space Marines, right? Like the idea of them, the lore, how they play, all that stuff. But you absolutely hate painting them. Or maybe you actually just hate kind of painting them the way that you're supposed to according to Games Workshop and the people that you've been listening to at your local shop and stuff like that, and the videos you've been watching on YouTube. Maybe you should try a Tyranid or some other creature-based army. They paint very differently than Space Marines, and maybe something more organic is what you actually prefer. Changing up something like that can spur your motivation. Or maybe you're playing and painting lizardmen and all those scales and detail and all that kind of stuff are just something that you can't stand. Maybe something smoother like Stormcast Eternals will make you happier. And if you're an army player, but you hate painting armies, then maybe change up every single squad that you do for your army so that they at least all kind of feel different, right? Like maybe you're painting Ultramarines, but each squad is a different shade of blue. They're not all identical, which can get really boring, right? Or maybe each squad doesn't even have to be blue. They could all just be the different kind of cooler colors like blue and green and purple to help break things up and make each squad seem like a different skirmish force to help your motivation. Sometimes motivation is just due to you not actually enjoying the hobby. You don't actually like to build and paint, no matter what it is. And that's okay. But maybe you do like to build and paint. You're just not building and painting the right stuff for you or in the way that you like, and you just don't know it yet. If my wife had stopped knitting because she didn't enjoy the socks and the amigurumi or whatever, then she wouldn't have realized how much she loves knitting sweaters and shawls. Knitting has enriched her life. She just had to find her just right niche within the hobby to really grow. If you're having hobby motivation problems, you're not alone. Lots of people do. But before you throw in the towel, maybe change some things up a bit. Try painting differently. I know that airbrush and speed paints have completely changed how I paint, and I enjoy it so much more than I used to. Or maybe you're into sketch painting, or like super chunky grimdark enamel washes, or maybe non-metallic metals. If what you're doing now isn't working, then continuing to do it exactly the same way and just kind of hoping it gets better for you, it probably isn't the right answer. Try hobbying differently and see how it works. Are you in a hobby rut? Is your motivation non-existent? Have you tried painting differently, whether with like a different technique or style or different paints or tools? Is it the types of games or the types of models that might be killing your vibe? And did changing any of this stuff save your hobby? Let us all read your stories and what worked or didn't work for you down in the comments below. While you're down there, maybe some depressmentation of the like button will also help your motivation. It couldn't hurt, right? Subscribe to see more videos like this every single week, and thanks for watching.